Windows is slowly turning from an operating system into a behavior tracking platform. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's not someone in a forum with a tinfoil hat. That's the quiet, uncomfortable conclusion you start reaching when you pay close enough attention to what your computer is doing when you're not watching it. Think about the last time you sat down at your Windows machine. Maybe you were just trying to open a browser. Maybe you wanted to find a file you saved 3 weeks ago. And somewhere in between unlocking your screen and getting anything done, Windows interrupted you. A prompt, a notification, a nudge. Sign into your Microsoft account. Back up your files to OneDrive. Try the new Copilot feature. Let us improve your experience. Let us improve your experience. That phrase used to mean something good. Now it sits in the corner of your screen like a stranger who keeps asking for your personal information in exchange for letting you use your own desk. And here's what makes it strange. It's not dramatic. It doesn't feel like an attack. It feels like slow pressure, like water rising 1 inch at a time. You don't notice it until you look down and realize you're standing in it. That's what this video is about. Not about switching operating systems for fun, not about hating Microsoft, not about becoming some kind of terminal typing Linux wizard who drinks black coffee and talks about kernel builds. This is about something much more personal than that. This is about ownership. Let's talk about what's actually happening inside Windows right now, because some of it, when laid out calmly, is genuinely unsettling. A few years ago, Microsoft introduced something called telemetry, diagnostic data collection. The idea was reasonable enough on paper. Send anonymous usage information back to Microsoft so they can improve the product. Most software does some version of this, fine. But the scale of what Windows collects and the difficulty of turning it off started raising eyebrows. Security researchers and privacy advocates began documenting what was being sent. Error reports, yes, but also app usage patterns, search queries, typing behavior in some configurations, location data, connected devices, and more. And in the default settings, most users had no idea any of it was happening. Then came the Microsoft account requirement. If you've tried to set up a fresh Windows 11 installation recently, you already know, Microsoft has made it increasingly difficult, bordering on aggressive, to use Windows without signing into a Microsoft account. What used to be optional became strongly encouraged, then almost mandatory, with workarounds that break with each new update. Your computer, their account, their cloud. And then came OneDrive. OneDrive is not inherently evil. Cloud storage has legitimate uses. But the way Microsoft has baked OneDrive into Windows, the desktop shortcuts moving there without warning, your files are backed up, notifications before you agreed to back anything up, the default redirects that quietly route your documents folder to a cloud drive you might not even realize you're paying for, that's a different story. That's not a feature. That's an assumption. An assumption that your files belong in their ecosystem. And now we've arrived at the thing that made a lot of people finally Google, how do I leave Windows? Recall. Windows Recall, Microsoft's AI feature that takes periodic screenshots of everything happening on your screen and stores them so an AI can search through your computing history like a photo album. The idea was framed as helpful. Find anything you've ever seen on your PC. But what researchers and privacy experts immediately pointed out was the obvious. This means your screen activity, your emails, your banking pages, your private conversations, your medical searches, is being captured and stored locally and in early implementations in ways that weren't adequately secured. Microsoft paused and restructured Recall after the backlash. They made it opt-in. They added encryption. To their credit, they listened, but something had already shifted. Because the question people started asking wasn't, is Recall safe now? The question was, why does my operating system want to watch what I do at all? And that question, once you ask it, doesn't go away. Most people don't hate AI. Read that again, because it's important. Most people don't hate AI, they use it every day. They ask it questions, they use it to write things, to plan things, to figure out why their dishwasher is making a sound. AI as a tool feels useful. AI as a choice feels empowering. What people hate is AI they didn't ask for. AI that was placed inside the operating system itself, not as an option, but as an assumption. Not here's a tool if you want it, but here's a feature that watches your screen, interprets your behavior, and improves your experience whether you asked for that or not. Using AI as a tool feels very different from living inside an AI-powered operating system. And that distinction, and that gap between tool and environment, is where a lot of people are standing right now, feeling something they can't quite name. It's not paranoia. It's the quiet, creeping sense that the computer sitting on your desk, the one you paid for, the one that holds your photos and your work and your private conversations, increasingly feels like it belongs to someone else. That's the feeling we're going to address tonight. Here's what almost nobody tells you about Linux. It's not what you think it is. For years, the word Linux conjured a very specific image. Black terminal, green text, a guy with strong opinions about operating systems explaining why you're wrong about everything. Unapproachable, cold, for engineers only, That world still exists. But it's a small corner of something much, much larger, because over the last decade, Linux distributions, distros as they're called, have evolved into something the average person never expected. They've become calm, genuinely, beautifully calm. And the first one we're going to talk about is proof of that. Linux Mint. Imagine a version of Windows that never went through its awkward phase. No forced updates at the worst possible moment. No login screen demanding you connect to a cloud account before you can use your own machine. No AI assistant watching from the corner. No OneDrive quietly absorbing your documents folder. Just a desktop, clean, familiar, yours. That's Linux Mint. The desktop looks like what Windows users remember Windows feeling like back when it was just a computer. A taskbar at the bottom, a start menu, file folders that work exactly the way your brain expects them to. Nothing surprising, nothing hidden. When you open Linux Mint for the first time, something almost jarring happens. Nothing interrupts you, you just use it. No account setup, no cloud sync request, no let's get you started wizard trying to connect you to a subscription service. Your files stay on your machine. That's not a setting you have to hunt for, that's the default. Linux Mint is built on top of Ubuntu, which itself is built on Debian, two of the most well-supported foundations in the Linux world. This means that when something breaks, and occasionally things do break on any operating system, you're not alone. There are thousands of tutorials, forums, and guides written specifically for Mint. This isn't a niche system built by 3 people in a basement. It's used by millions worldwide. And it receives regular security updates, quietly, without demanding you restart at a time that's inconvenient for you, without making the update process feel like a hostage negotiation. The software manager in Mint is genuinely easy to use. It looks like a simple app store. You search for a program, you install it, no command line required. For basic needs, browsing documents, media, email, everything you use daily is available, free, and already works. There's no telemetry pressure built into the experience. Mint asks if you'd like to share anonymous usage statistics during setup, and it's completely optional. One checkbox, that's it. That's the whole conversation about your data. If you've been on Windows for 20 years and you're scared to leave, Linux Mint is the distro that doesn't ask you to be brave. It just asks you to sit down and try it. It is, in the truest sense, the version of Windows that people thought they still had. But not everyone wants familiar. Some people are tired, not just of Windows, tired of computing feeling cheap, tired of software that looks like it was designed by a committee optimizing for engagement rather than experience, tired of visual clutter, of ugly font rendering, of UI that apologizes for itself. Some people want their computer to feel like something worth sitting down at. For those people, there's Zorin OS. The first time you boot into Zorin, there's a moment of genuine surprise. This looks expensive. It looks like something a design team spent real money on. The animations are smooth. The interface feels intentional. Every corner of the desktop seems like someone cared about it, and yet it's free, completely free, open source, built by a small team with an almost irrational commitment to making Linux feel polished. Zorin is designed explicitly for people migrating from Windows or Mac. It comes with different layout options. You can make it look like Windows or like a Mac or like something entirely its own. The transitions are subtle and fast. Nothing stutters, nothing fights you. It has deep Steam support, which matters more than it might seem. Steam on Linux has evolved dramatically over the last few years, thanks largely to Valve's own investment in Linux gaming compatibility. A significant and growing library of Windows games now runs on Linux through Steam's Proton layer. Not perfectly, not always, but better than most people expect. Zorin also handles file sharing privately without routing anything through a cloud service. Transferring files between 2 computers on the same network is simple, local, and doesn't require anyone's account. Underneath the beautiful surface, Zorin is also solid. It's based on Ubuntu LTS, long-term support, which means it gets security updates for years. You're not trading beauty for stability, you're getting both. Sitting at a Zorin desktop for the first time, after weeks of Windows pop-ups and cloud prompts and AI panels sliding in from the right side of the screen, feels like walking out of a loud restaurant into a quiet evening. It doesn't demand anything from you, it just works. Beautifully. Now, let's stop here for a second, because there are some honest things to say, things most Linux videos skip because they want to keep the energy positive and the comments happy. Switching to Linux is not costless. If you use Adobe products, Photoshop, Premiere, Illustrator, those applications do not run natively on Linux. Adobe has never released Linux versions of their Creative Suite. You can use alternatives like GIMP or Darktable for photos, Kdenlive or DaVinci Resolve for video, Inkscape for vector work. These are legitimate, capable tools, but they are different tools. There is a learning curve. And if your entire creative workflow is built inside the Adobe ecosystem, that is a real migration challenge. Some games won't work on Linux, most do now, especially with Steam's Proton compatibility layer and the growing list of Linux native titles. But competitive multiplayer games with aggressive anti-cheat systems, games like Valorant, certain EA titles, those specifically block Linux. They're designed to. It's not a Linux failure. It's a deliberate restriction. But it matters if those games are important to you. Some software is simply Windows only, niche professional applications, certain industry tools, some specialty hardware drivers. Before you make any decision, you should spend an hour with a tool called ProtonDB and the Linux app database, just searching the specific software you rely on. The answers will be there. This is not meant to scare you back to Windows. It's meant to treat you like an adult. Because here's the thing. Most people, when they actually sit down and list the software they genuinely use every day, find that nearly everything they need either has a Linux version, has a web-based version, or has a Linux alternative that's good enough. The list of real blockers is usually shorter than the fear makes it feel. And the fear is worth naming because it's real. Switching operating systems is psychologically significant. Your computer isn't just a machine. It holds your photos, your documents, your passwords and playlists, and years of accumulated digital life. The idea of touching any of that, moving it, reorganizing it, risking it, feels dangerous. That feeling is valid, and it's also manageable. Let's talk about the migration itself. Not as a leap, as a process. Start with your files. Before you do anything else, back up your documents, photos, music, and anything else you care about. An external hard drive is ideal. Even a large USB drive works. Copy everything, twice, if it matters to you. Dual booting is an option that removes almost all the fear. You install Linux alongside Windows on the same computer, and when you start the machine, you choose which one to load. Windows stays exactly where it is, untouched, intact. You just also have Linux. You can spend weeks in Linux while Windows sits there as a safety net. Most people who try this eventually stop booting into Windows, not because it disappeared, but because they stopped needing it. If you're already fully switched, Linux can mount your Windows drives directly. Open the file manager, click on the Windows partition, and your old files are right there. The folder structure looks identical. You can copy anything you need. Your browser bookmarks and passwords transfer easily. If you're using Chrome or Firefox, and you probably are, just sign into your browser account on Linux and everything syncs. Bookmarks, passwords, extensions, history, nothing is lost. LibreOffice comes pre-installed on most Linux distros. It opens Microsoft Word, Excel, and PowerPoint files. For most everyday documents, it works without incident. For complex spreadsheets or heavily formatted Word documents, there can occasionally be formatting shifts. For purely reading and writing, it handles everything. The Linux app stores, Flatpak, Snap, the distro's native package manager, make installing software genuinely easy. Search for a program, click install, done. No visiting sketchy websites, no hunting for installers, no free download buttons that aren't actually the download. And about AI, because you might actually want it on your own terms. On Linux, you can use Claude through a browser, ChatGPT through a browser, any AI tool you choose when you choose it for the task you choose it for. What you won't have is an AI baked into the operating system itself, watching your screen, sitting in your taskbar, reshaping your file system around what it thinks your priorities are. That's the difference. AI as a choice, not AI as an environment. Now let's move into the deeper end of the Linux world for the people in the audience who feel ready. Fedora. Fedora is sponsored by Red Hat, one of the most significant companies in enterprise Linux. That matters because it means Fedora is serious software. Tested, maintained, and trusted by organizations with real stakes in stability. But Fedora isn't just enterprise software in disguise. It has a clean, modern GNOME desktop that feels deliberately minimal. Not minimal like it's missing things. Minimal like someone removed everything that wasn't necessary and left only what was. The result is a desktop that feels clear-headed, like a workspace designed for actual thinking. Fedora ships with almost no proprietary software by default. That's a philosophical choice, one that may occasionally require you to install a codec or a driver manually. But the community around Fedora is large and well documented. You're rarely the first person to encounter any problem. Fedora sits at the leading edge of the Linux ecosystem. It ships newer versions of software faster than most distros. This means you get improvements sooner, and occasionally a rougher edge. It's a trade-off worth knowing about. Debian is a different experience entirely. Debian is old. Not old in a dusty way, old in a foundational way, the way concrete is old. It has been continuously developed and maintained since 1993. It prioritizes stability above everything. If Fedora is the system that sprints forward, Debian is the one that refuses to fall down. Debian's default setup is Spartan. It doesn't hold your hand through installation the way Mint does. It assumes a certain willingness to engage with the system directly. But what you get in return is an operating system that does exactly what you tell it, nothing more and nothing less. No assumptions, no cloud nudges, no background processes you didn't authorize. These are not systems built for engagement metrics. They were built because someone believed computers should do what their owners wanted. That belief increasingly feels radical. We should slow down here and say something out loud that's been underneath this entire video. This isn't really about Linux. It's about what happened to the personal computer. For decades, the PC was one of the most genuinely empowering tools ever created. You bought one, it was yours, the files on it were yours, the software on it was yours. You could do almost anything with it, and nobody was watching, and nobody was asking you to connect to their cloud, and nobody was building a profile of your behavior in the background. That slowly changed. It changed gradually enough that most people didn't notice when it happened. The first accounts, the first sync services, the first improve your experience prompts, each one individually benign. Collectively, they redrew the relationship between the user and the machine. The personal computer quietly became a cloud terminal, a device whose primary function, as far as the software was concerned, was to keep you connected to a company's ecosystem and keep sending data upstream. And the most disorienting part is that it happened gently, without drama, without announcement. Just a slow series of convenient-seeming features that cumulatively moved the center of gravity from your hard drive to their server. Ownership didn't disappear loudly, it dissolved quietly, and that's why people are looking at their computers differently now. It's why a person who has used Windows for 20 years, who never thought twice about operating systems, who would have laughed 5 years ago at the idea of switching, that person is watching a video like this one, looking for a way back to something that used to feel obvious. Ownership of your files, ownership of your privacy, ownership of what runs on your machine, what sees your screen, what knows your patterns, ownership of your digital life. Linux doesn't solve every problem. It creates some new ones. It asks something of you, not much, but something. A willingness to try something unfamiliar, a tolerance for occasional friction, a decision to value control over convenience, at least sometimes. But what it gives back is something real. A desktop with no ads, no AI watching, no cloud nudging, no notification from the operating system itself asking for your account. Just a computer doing what you tell it to do, belonging entirely to you. For a lot of people, that feeling, that simple, almost boring feeling of just using a computer, has started to feel like something worth fighting for. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. The way you close a window and sit in silence and realize the noise was never something you asked for. So if you had to leave Windows tomorrow, if you had to pick one Linux distro to trust with your digital life, your files, your work, your photos, which one would it be? Linux Mint, familiar and steady, the system that meets you where you are. Zorin OS, polished and calm, the system that makes you feel good about where you're going. Fedora or Debian, principled and solid, the systems that don't negotiate their independence. That question is worth sitting with, because the answer says something about what you actually value. Not about operating systems, but about what kind of relationship you want to have with this machine sitting on your desk. There's more to this story. Because Windows isn't done changing, and some of what's coming, the deeper AI integration, the tighter account requirements, the features Microsoft hasn't fully announced yet, deserves its own conversation. We'll have that conversation soon.